Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we have a really dense episode. We'll be talking about the AMD Warhol rumors and Zen 3 Plus / Ryzen 6000 rumors from previously, talking about the Ethereum mining efficiency reductions and Nvidia's increased limiters, including new GPU silicon that is supposed to be hardware limited for mining. We'll also be going over DDR5 at 10,000 megahertz goals, Intel finding itself on Mars, and a couple of other things. Before that, this video is brought to you by EVGA's new keyboards. EVGA's new Z20 and Z15 RGB optical mechanical gaming keyboards have abundant RGB LEDs and programmable macro keys on the left side of the keyboard. They also have a sensor to detect and turn on the LEDs when you're in front of the keyboard and turn them off when distant, offering a unique feature for keyboards. The keyboard claims a 0.5 millisecond response time and 100 million keystroke lifespan. Learn more at the link in the description below. So first up, last time we talked about Nvidia limiting the mining hash rate, it was related to the RTX 3060 launch. And this was a troubled attempt at limiting mining. So Nvidia basically put in a driver plus firmware level limitation on the hash rate, where it was supposed to cut the hash rate in half. And there were a couple of false stories saying, oh, it's been hacked already. But actually what had happened was people were using the cards to mine other things at the full hash rate, but not Ethereum, and that was a key differentiator. Then Nvidia owned itself and launched a driver branch with a bypass in place, and at that point you can't put that can of worms away. It's done. So that was the story up until now. What's happening now though is it looks like Nvidia is attempting this again, except this time there are some hardware identifiers on GPU silicon that have been popping up in photos online. Typically, you'll see a piece of silicon might be labeled something like GA106-something, 400, 300, whatever. But now there's a 2 appended to there. So it might be 302, 402, something like that. And that 2, if the rumors are to be believed, identifies that the GPU is part of an LHR, or light hash rate, version of GPUs. It's supposed to be a physical hardware limitation on these cards that in theory will be more difficult to bypass if Nvidia doesn't release some sort of key to unlock it by accident. And this looks to be like Nvidia trying to get more CMP sales. Maybe they're trying to buy some goodwill in the community, a little bit late for that at this point, but more realistically, Nvidia is going for an increase in sales of its new CMP mining line of GPUs, and specifically, we think, is trying to limit the damage that will be done to its next series launch, the 4000 series, by reducing the amount of used cards in the market. Again, a little bit late on that, but if they can reduce another 6 months of GPU purchasing for miners that will later become used second-hand cards for gamers, then Nvidia is helping itself, because it will increase the sales of the next product if it decreases the second-hand sales of the current product. And we saw this last time with the RTX 20 series launch, where, especially because RTX games didn't exist for nearly 2 months after the launch of the cards named RTX, but also because of the price and because of the flooding of the secondhand market, people were buying a lot of 10 series. And so it hurt the sales performance of the 20 series, and Nvidia doesn't see any revenue from secondhand sales. So like how games publishers and console makers don't really want secondhand sales of their products via GameStonk, the limitations Nvidia is putting in place in theory, would help it with a reduction of the flood of GPUs to the secondhand market. So that's part one of this story. Basically, Nvidia is once again attempting to limit the mining performance, this time though perhaps with a doubled down effort on it. Meanwhile, the Ethereum cryptocurrency has once again claimed that it will, for reals this time, move to proof of stake from proof of work. Proof of work, i.e. mining, is supposed to be phased out. The Ethereum project is saying by end of year 2021, there will be reductions in the incentive to mine by July of 2021 in theory. Ethereum, to be clear, this has been stated for years and years at this point. I remember reporting on this when it was stated probably in 2017 or 18, last time there was a big surge in GPU demand by miners, but it is being said again. Maybe this time it's going to happen. Either way, any mining thereafter, after Ethereum pushes for a move to proof of stake, which frankly we don't really understand too much because we're not into crypto, but it is a move away from GPU mining as we know it today. As Ethereum pushes towards that, the usefulness of mining would be mostly relegated to any alternative cryptocurrencies other than Ethereum, and certainly not Bitcoin, which is Bitcoin's basically ASIC only at this point. So ultimately, if Ethereum becomes unworthwhile to mine, there might be another flood of cards to the secondhand market, and maybe that'll be a little bit of an indirect easing of the demand versus supply situation. So that's the news on that front of things. About that AMD Warhol rumor, that's up next. So this past week, the internet got a bit crazy with a certain rumor that claimed that AMD had canceled its alleged Warhol CPUs. Previously, there were various rumor and leak sites that attempted to connect this leaked slide of Warhol appearing to Zen 3 Plus and to a Ryzen 6000 series. So that was based on a slide that hit the internet some time back. It's old news at this point. In actual fact, there was never any leak, from what we understand, of first-party information pertaining specifically to the phrases Zen 3 Plus and Ryzen 6000. Warhol, it sounds like, from what we understand, is a real AMD thing, but there wasn't anything critical to connect it to those other two buzzwords, and that's the key differentiator here. So, in speaking with our contacts off record, of course, so we can't name people, but Warhol's existence is different from the story that has been fabricated on the internet. It sounds like one of our contacts directly described it as, quote, creating their own rumor and then canceling it. AMD hasn't had any public Zen 3 Plus mentions, and from what we've seen, it hasn't had any non-public mentions either that were legitimate. So the suggestion here is that Warhol might be a thing, but it may have been linked by non-AMD entities to the other stories of Zen 3 Plus and Ryzen 6000. So it's a rumor born of a rumor that was negated by the community, basically. So it's a non-story, is what we're saying. Next one, DDR5, 10,000 megahertz future goals, and for the more immediate kits, looking at timings of 40, 40, 40, not abnormal for moving to a new DDR standard. DDR5 DRAM production is continuing apace. It's been an emerging community. Micron, SK Hynix, and Samsung have all talked about DDR5 at this point, and then partners like Team and Crucial have been talking about their own first attempts at DDR5 modules. The recent reports we're seeing are now indicating that major module makers in China, so specifically that'd be Jiahe Jinwei and NetAC, are ready for mass production of DDR5 memory. Jiahe Jinwei shared photos of its first DDR5 modules using Micron DDR5 ICs, and the company also showed off both single and double-sided modules, with the single-sided DDR5 module coming in at 16 gigabytes and the double-sided module offering 32 gigabytes. Of course, there will be many other versions later, but these are early samples. Both of these will run at 1.1 volts. That is per the new JEDEC DDR5 standard. JEDEC is the standards body for DDR, and the first DDR5 modules from Jiahe Jinwei will run at 4800 megahertz with timings of 40, 40, 40. In the same vein, NetAC is also using Micron memory for its first DDR5 modules, and according to its press releases and news announcements, it has readied single-sided 16 gigabyte modules that also run at 4800 and 1.1 volts. The timings are the same at 40, 40, 40. Should the mild starting frequency of early DDR5 have you disappointed, keep in mind again that some of these companies like NetAC have already stated sights on DDR5 at 10,000 megahertz in the future. And if you haven't been through a DDR switchover cycle in the past, typically the way it works is the first round of memory will underperform versus the most recent round of the previous memory. So when we switched from 3 to 4, the high-end DDR3 memory was about at pace or better than the low-end DDR4 memory. And of course, the pricing made it really not make a lot of sense to move to DDR4 immediately if you didn't know a specific reason to move to DDR4. Server companies would be an example of an instance where it does make sense to switch quickly. Additional images of DDR5 4800 modules from Crucial were spotted in the past week. So DDR5 4800 seems to be basically the starting point for DDR5, but development and research will move quickly ahead. JEDEC's DDR5 SDRAM standard tops out at DDR5 6400 right now, but just like we've seen with DDR4, there will be many memory kits that scale well beyond that as the technology matures. If you've ever wondered who uses Intel's Atom CPUs, the answer is apparently NASA. That's right, Intel announced early last week that NASA is using two of its Atom-based CPUs in its new Perseverance lander, a $2.7 billion machine that's currently roving around on Mars. And friend of the site and writer at PC World, Gordon Ma-Un, probably put it to the best. He's a brilliant writer and a fun interview guest. Gordon, in his write-up on PC World, said the following, quote, Intel's underpowered Atom CPU has finally found some respect on Mars. The lowly chip had a tough time on Earth, winning the faintest of praise for its pedestrian performance. But its energy-sipping ways were apparently a good fit for a couple of compute modules that NASA built into its $2.7 billion Perseverance rover, wrote Gordon. At this point, of course, we're looking forward to the crypto forensics reports that show activity on the blockchain and mining from another planet. We'd assume that's what they're doing with them. What else would you do? It's cold up there. So this is genuinely, it's an interesting story. It's an impressive use of Intel silicon. And there's another adjoining piece here. So CompuLab is providing NASA with two of its COMX IE38 computer on module, or COM products, which is a type of single board computer. It uses Intel's Bay Trail Atom E3800, and Intel's Bay Trail SoCs are based on Intel's 22 nanometer process using its Silvermont microarchitecture. The COMX IE38 boards power two data storage units, or DSUs, that handle all of the raw data coming from Perseverance's 23 cameras. The data is then compressed by the IE38 modules before being transferred to a 480 gigabyte SSD via Ethernet link, where it waits to be beamed back to NASA. According to CompuLab's vice president, CompuLab, quote, had no idea that its products were being used to help power the lander. A nice surprise, probably. They just knew that NASA had bought a couple of COMX IE38 boards. Up next, Microsoft, addressing a couple of issues relating to Windows 10 updates impacting gaming performance. So this month, Microsoft rolled out a pair of Windows 10 updates that impacted some users' gaming performance. It caused frame rate drops and crashes as well. And the updates in question are the KB ending number 1330 and this is far too fitting to be true. This can't be true. And the KB ending number 1337 updates. Why? Why Microsoft? For Windows 10. So that's version 2004, and it is mostly targeted for security fixes. According to Microsoft, quote, a small subset of users have reported lower than expected performance in games after installing this update. Most users affected by this issue are running games full screen or borderless windowed mode and using two or more monitors. Microsoft's guidance that it suggested for fixing the issue for now is to use the new Known Issue Rollback, or KIR feature. KIR is a new feature that rolled out broadly last month and allows for reverting back to a previously known stable code for non-security related bugs and issues. And of course, note that a restart may still be required. Up next, the Linux Foundation in the news. We reported on this last week, but there's been a development of the story. So the University of Minnesota was banned from contributing to the Linux kernel thanks to a couple of students who were doing research for their graduate projects. And this ban was handed down by Greg Crow-Hartman. Now, though, the entire university got banned, as we reported, but the Linux developers over at the Linux Foundation have outlined some very specific actions that the school needs to take if it's ever to be welcomed back. ZDNet has obtained the letter from Mike Dolan, the Linux Foundation's Senior VP and General Manager of Projects, that discusses the incident and what needs to happen next. It reads, quote, please provide to the public in an expedited manner all information necessary to identify all proposals of known vulnerable code from any U of MN experiment. The information should include the name of each targeted software, the commit information, purported name of the proposer, email address, date, time, subject, and/or code, so that all software developers can quickly identify such proposals and potentially take remedial action for such experiments. If you're out of the loop on what's going on, the title of this paper would probably give it away. So it's, quote, on the feasibility of stealthily introducing vulnerabilities to open source software via commits. So Dolan wants this to be withdrawn, quote, from formal publication and formal presentation. All research work based on this or similar research where people appear to have been experimented on without their prior consent. Leaving archival information posted on the internet is fine, as they are mostly already public, but there should be no research credit for such works. This comes after last week there was another quote from a Linux developer who commented that it's similar to cutting the brake lines on cars in a shopping center parking lot to see how safe it would be. So basically, brilliant idea to research something everyone's thought about for decades at this point, of the security of software that is in fact open source, done on a project which is mission critical for a lot of people. So the end result is that the Linux Foundation and Greg Kroah-Hartman seem to think it's unethical, and we don't disagree, and that it's being experimented on. Finally, Dolan asked that the University of Minnesota take care to, quote, ensure that all future IRB reviews of proposed experiments on people will normally ensure the consent of those being experimented on per usual research norms and laws. As of now, the school hasn't responded with a plan of action. Up next, AMD recently announced its Q1 2021 earnings, and as one might expect, they were very healthy. AMD is currently selling every piece of CPU and GPU silicon that it can produce, and as a result, the company notched another record quarter, bringing in a total of $3.45 billion. That figure represents a massive 93% year-over-year jump, where AMD earned $1.7 billion for Q1 2020. The star of the show here is AMD's computing and graphics segment, with a quarterly revenue of $2.1 billion, a 46% year-over-year leap, and strong revenue earnings overall. As a reminder, computing and graphics would include the desktop CPU and GPU segments, but it does not differentiate between CPU and GPU, so we don't know which one's performing the best, although it's probably CPUs. AMD's strong revenue earnings here are, of course, driven by huge demand for Ryzen and Radeon products, and AMD noted that its client processor ASP, or average selling price, grew both year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter thanks to a stronger mix of Ryzen desktop and notebook sales. The same is also true for AMD's Radeon GPUs, as AMD is seeing an increase in its GPU ASP thanks to demand for its high-end Radeon offerings. We previously said it would likely take a couple of quarters to see the effects of AMD's semi-custom sales for the new Xbox and PlayStation consoles. Well, we're getting an idea now. AMD's enterprise, embedded, and semi-custom segment brought in $1.35 billion for the quarter, a massive 286% year-over-year increase. These numbers were driven by high semi-custom sales. The consoles from both Sony and Microsoft would be part of those sales. It also was driven by EPYC processor sales. In the subsequent earnings call, Dr. Lisa Su touched on a couple of points. Su pointed out that AMD's Radeon 6000 series sales have more than doubled quarter over quarter, and that AMD is moving to ramp production as we head into Q2 2021. That said, AMD expects GPU supply to be a bit better next quarter, which is certainly promising to hear. Last week, we reported on the arrival of a new cryptocurrency called Chia. Yes, really. And it's a storage-based cryptocurrency that promises to be more energy efficient, to the extent that they've somewhat cringily released a green paper instead of a white paper. And it plans to process the network on hard drive space. Chia is specifically calling this farming instead of mining, and is talking about seeding storage space. And this is also partly created by the inventor of BitTorrent, by the way. So Chia uses a proof of what they call time-space model for the cryptocurrency, as opposed to proof of work, for example, with GPUs. And ahead of Chia landing on currency exchanges and becoming tradable, we mentioned how users in some parts of the world, particularly in Asia right now, were already in a situation where storage and the price of storage was sailing upwards. There's potentially a concern here for a shortage of storage-based products in the future. A week or so later now, and things aren't exactly better. According to a report from Digitimes, AData has notched a 500% increase in SSD sales throughout the month of April. Digitimes also reports that the run on storage is starting to spill outside of Asia. AData told Digitimes that it's currently seeing orders at a rate of 400 to 500% higher than last month. And it credits the demand to Chia mining, or farming, or whatever. Rising SSD prices, however, aren't solely related to Chia. We're also in the middle of an SSD controller shortage due to other silicon shortages. Additionally, Chia is already on its way to killing warranties for SSDs, much like how Ethereum mining is slowly eroding GPU warranties. Gallick China has posted a warning on its website alerting prospective Chia farmers that, this sounds so silly, that using Gallick's SSDs for Chia mining and farming, where the read and write volume far exceeds what Gallick considers standard use, will void the warranty. Fear not, however, because greed does breed innovation. There's now a new 32 SATA port motherboard. You can plug the drive straight into the board. No cables needed. So that exists now. Okay, let's go to the next story. The Game Developers Conference is preparing to kick off in full force over the summer, with dates set for July 19th to 23rd. This year, ahead of GDC 2021, the Game Developers Survey polled 3,000 game developers on topics such as developing games remotely and related game delays to that, alongside what platforms are of the most interest to developers. This survey is pretty interesting because it is specifically targeting game developers, so we get to learn a little bit about what's happening within the industry. Regarding the pandemic-related delays, 44% of the polled developers said that a game they were working on suffered a delay specifically as a result from working from home or other measures related to that. Interestingly, the results also showed a large percentage of studios still growing in spite of last year, with a 47% grouping of those saying that staff had expanded in the last year. On the topic of revenue sharing and digital storms, looking at too many SIs lately, on the topic of digital stores and revenue sharing, the amount of developers who approve of the traditional 30-70 revenue split, with the store getting 30 in the case of Steam, for example, the amount of developers in favor of that is rapidly shrinking. It's down to 3% saying they're in favor or support a 30-70 split versus 6% last year, neither particularly high, but it's still a massive reduction. Now, this coincides with a recent trend of major storefronts cutting back on their revenue sharing policy. For instance, Google will start taking 15% from games that have generated less than $1 million on the Google Play Store. Similarly, Apple has also reduced its cut to 15% for games who have earned less than $1 million on the App Store. In both the case of Google and Apple, the cut goes back to 30% after a game crosses the $1 million threshold. Epic Games by far leads the way here with a flat 12% cut regardless of the game's earnings. Epic has also introduced a number of other more developer-friendly practices, such as guaranteed minimums. We recently discussed just how much that's costing Epic Games, where the company is, as one would expect with a new endeavor, losing money on its Epic Games store. This is something that came to light thanks to the current lawsuit with Apple, but it's not particularly surprising information. Most companies will lose money on a new endeavor. Either way, though, they're spending a lot on this and can also afford it, thanks to Fortnite primarily. So Steam, at this point, seems to be among the last storefronts that is holding a 30-70 split, but with enough peer pressure in the industry, that may change at some point. The survey also highlights that the PS5 and PC are the top platforms for developers to be working on right now. For consoles, 44% of those polled said they were most interested in developing for the PS5. There was a group of 38% interested in the Nintendo Switch for development, with the Xbox Series X and S trailing a bit behind at 30%. And additionally, the PC is the leading gaming platform by developer choice and interest at 58%, and I believe they could have selected multiple of these to explain the percentages. Cloudflare, up next. Cloudflare is preparing to battle Sable Networks over a patent infringement lawsuit. We bring this up because Cloudflare, much like Newegg in the past, has a certain fervor and enthusiasm for fighting against patent trolls. Plus, patent litigation has been something of a recurring theme for the past few weeks. This marks the second time that Cloudflare will have to contend with a patent infringement lawsuit. The last time it was Blackbird Technologies that sued Cloudflare. And Cloudflare not only won the lawsuit, but went to full-on scorched earth against Blackbird. It's kind of insane. It started Project Django, in which it crowdsourced with paid bounties an effort to find prior art for patents held by its opponent, Blackbird Technologies. It then published prior art for a huge swath of those patents, which will benefit anyone who ends up in a lawsuit with Blackbird in the future, and functionally sets up the stage to invalidate the patents held by Blackbird. That's what the prior art statements are for. Cloudflare didn't stop there, though. It also went after the lawyers behind Blackbird Technologies on the grounds of violating legal ethics rules. And the end result, as Cloudflare puts it, was that, quote, Blackbird Technologies went from being one of the most prolific patent trolls in the United States to shrinking its staff and filing many fewer cases. Now, Cloudflare is gearing up to do it all over again. Sable Networks is using patents that are 20 years old at this point in a string of lawsuits against several companies, Cloudflare included. The patents originate from Caspian Networks, which was once a router company. According to Cloudflare, Sable Networks is using 4 patents filed between 2000 and 2004 that are based on Caspian's flow-based routing technology. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Cloudflare certainly has a bit of an entertaining approach to dealing with these types of cases, so it might be a while before we hear an update, but it's a good one to follow. In other news this week, Google added a search bar to Stadia. That's right, Google, the search engine company, to the extent that just Google it has become global vernacular, they've added a search bar to Stadia. So it's not dead yet. And also, Microsoft is saying it's committed to PC gaming. So Microsoft said that it's intending for Halo Infinite to be a, quote, premier PC experience, which is something you don't hear too often in PC development. And in a post over at Xbox Wire, Microsoft doubled down on what it calls a player-first approach to PC. The company said, quote, "We have been working closely with the PC community to ensure that Halo Infinite offers a premier experience, including highly desired features such as support for ultra-wide and super ultra-wide screens. Also triple keybinds, a wide variety of advanced graphics options, and more. We want to make sure that Halo is serving the PC community." Microsoft also said it wants to meet gamers wherever they want to download the games. So it's planning to offer the games on Steam, Xbox Game Pass, or some other storefront. And additionally, it's working on what it calls more developer-friendly practices. So these would include a reworking of the revenue split, and it's pushing for a 12-88 split. 12% for Microsoft, 88% for the developer. That would be following Epic Games' example. So Epic, for as big of a lawsuit as it's gotten itself into with Apple, seems like is indirectly pushing others in the industry to change their model. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up one of our mod mats, mouse mats, shirts, or other items. And you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus for behind-the-scenes videos and extra Q&A videos for our backers. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.